You're listening to Release Your Resistance with Bex Beltran, episode 44. Welcome to Release Your Resistance. This is Bex. The only reason why any of us don't have what we want in life is because of our own resistance. Right now, I'm learning how to recognize and release my resistance, and this podcast tells you how you can release your resistance so that you can live the exact life that you want. Let's get started. Are you a fairy tale fan? Do you have a favorite story that includes adventure and mythical creatures and suspense and drama and a little bit of magic? What's not to love, right? Especially when we were kids, when we were innocent and impressionable and spent so much of our time in our own imaginations. Have you ever stopped to consider that fairy tales are actually excellent advertising tools for kids? When you think about it, fairy tales are entertainment, just like a lot of commercials are entertaining, but really fairy tales are cautionary messages of morality to teach kids and warn them and, dare I say, brainwash them to think and behave in a certain way. And without the fairy tale device to deliver those messages, I don't think it works as well. What kid is going to sit quietly and listen to a lecture on morality or expected behavior? What kid is going to listen to advice about how to act or who to watch out for unless there's some hook keeping them engaged and invested in the message? And please don't misunderstand me. I don't have anything against fairy tales. I loved them as a little girl, and I love them now. So much, in fact, that I have noticed that I am starting to use some common fairy tale concepts to explain things in a memorable way to myself as an adult. So that's what I want to share with you in today's episode. Most of the elements I want to tell you about are cautionary. I do want to warn you away from some of the thinking dangers I have noticed in myself, and I hope I'm making them memorable and interesting enough so that you think about them later as you're going through your day-to-day activities. I want you to be on the lookout for 4 familiar fairy tale characters: a knight in shining armor, a fairy godmother, a villain, and a hero. Back when I worked in a corporate setting, I remember frequently thinking that things weren't going as they should be going. Other employees weren't doing what they should be doing. Bosses weren't acting according to their responsibilities. And sometimes, in my disappointment about how things weren't going in the way I knew they should be going, I would wonder, who can fix this? Who can make this right? Who can put things back in order? Basically, what I was wishing for and hoping for was a knight in shining armor to ride in and save the day. I wanted some strong authority to come to my rescue in this situation that was unfair or unjust or just not the way I thought it should be. Sometimes I thought it should be HR. Or sometimes I thought it should be a different manager or a different department. I just knew that this, what was happening, wasn't right or wasn't fair or someone should fix it. What I didn't realize at that time was the biggest problem was not what was happening, what the other people were doing or weren't doing, or how the project was or wasn't progressing. The biggest problem was my resistance to reality, my resistance to what was actually happening. I was telling myself this shouldn't be happening, but now I know, of course, it should have been happening because it was happening. That's reality. Back in those days, or once upon a time, if you like, I created a lot of stress and frustration for myself with my resistance and with my mistaken belief that whatever I thought the problem was could or should or would be fixed by someone else. At that time, I never would have referred to my need to have a situation fixed as a knight in shining armor. I only came up with that metaphor recently. But if you would have suggested the concept to me at that time, I probably would have agreed with the metaphor and believed that it's what was needed, what was called for. Towards the end of my corporate career, during the time that overlapped with me learning about thought work and mindset and self-coaching, I started to notice this pattern in myself. I started to notice that I would get frustrated about a situation, and because of what I was learning, I was now able to notice that the frustration was coming from my thoughts, that this shouldn't be happening. At that time, I used the mental phrase legislate. I remember telling myself, "Oh, Bex, you think this is wrong and you're expecting someone to legislate this for you?" And for some reason, when I used that phrase, it reminded me that no one was going to legislate it for me. No one necessarily thought it was a problem like I did. Bosses didn't behave the way I thought they should. Other employees didn't do things I expected them to. And no one was going to legislate that. No knight in shining armor was going to swoop in and save the day. And now I know I never have to keep thinking, this shouldn't be happening. Instead, I have learned to recognize my resistant thoughts and feelings and practice accepting what is actually happening. And then, from a place of acceptance instead of resistance, I can decide how I want to proceed. That is the first fairy tale character I want to introduce you to. Someone you might notice yourself wishing for, even if you don't call it that, in your own life. Have you ever caught yourself thinking, someone should fix this or solve this, or someone needs to make this right because this shouldn't be happening? Or in other words, were you ever expecting a knight in shining armor? The second character I want to introduce you to might show up not when something has gone wrong, but when you want something to go especially right. You might notice yourself wishing for something, and wouldn't it be amazing if your own personal fairy godmother could just wave a magic wand and grant that wish for you? Do you feel entitled for something to work out for you or to benefit you magically? And then when it doesn't happen, do you feel disappointed? I see this in situations where someone might say or think, I deserve to get this job, or I deserve to love working out, or I should have a great relationship. This opening for a fairy godmother might also appear when you want things to happen instantly, or magically, or easily. And I don't necessarily think there's anything wrong or a problem with imagining a fairy godmother or a magic wand or a genie in a bottle. You know I love the idea of manifesting, which may seem like a similar concept to this. What I do want to call attention to is when the wish or the entitlement or the deserving causes you to abdicate your own power and responsibility. Are you closing off your creativity and resourcefulness and problem-solving abilities? Also, if you are wishing something would happen magically or instantly, are you believing the future will be better than the present? Are you convinced that after the wish is granted, you will feel differently than you feel now? My question to you is, why would that be better? What is the problem with the current state, with reality? What are you resisting, if anything, in this moment? I think wanting something to happen for you magically is good from the standpoint of opening your mind to a possibility and believing that it is possible, instead of shutting yourself down and telling yourself it's not possible. When I think about the phrase, why can't this just be easy, or why can't this just be done already, it brings up a few thoughts for me. It makes me think that the person asking those questions has some desperation or urgency. Wanting something to just happen magically also suggests to me that there is some delegation of power or ability. If you wish something was just easier or could just happen, is it implying that you don't want to do it yourself, or you can't do something, or that you don't see your ability to do something as possible, even though you see the outcome as possible? And even the phrasing of the question, why can't this be easier, implies that it's not easier. So in that sense, there is a little bit of closed-mindedness. For example, what if instead of asking, why can't this be easier, you were asking, why is this or how is this easy? And put your mind to work looking for ways to prove that it is easy. And the other example, why can't this be done already, could translate into, how is this already done or as good as done? And if your brain has to answer that question, you might come up with some very creative and different and out-of-the-box answers. So maybe you don't need a fairy godmother to make things happen for you after all. Maybe you're just not currently noticing how you can make them happen or how you already are making them happen for yourself. Another fairy tale character I want to reintroduce you to is the villain. This metaphor came to light for me when I realized I was being cast as a villain in someone else's story. I started to notice a pattern. Well, I thought of it as a pattern. When someone I was close to would tell me I was to blame for something bad that had happened, or that it was my fault that this unfortunate situation occurred. In one case, specifically where this happened, I could so clearly see that I had nothing to do with it. I could not have impacted the outcome in any way. So I wondered, why is this person pulling me into their narrative? I realized, maybe it's more convenient and comfortable to blame someone else for what has happened than to accept their own responsibility, or just to accept that sometimes bad things senselessly happen. Maybe they are so frustrated they just want someone else to be at fault. Or maybe blaming someone else, a villain, is a self-preservation mechanism. Have you heard the quote by John Wooden, "You are not a failure until you start blaming others for your mistakes"? So in the context of casting someone else as a villain, when you blame someone else, is that actually creating the danger of then identifying yourself as a failure? And if that's the case, then are you closing yourself off to any growth or improvement opportunities? Realizing that I was being cast as a villain turned out to be so helpful. First of all, because I didn't think I had any culpability, I was not defensive and I could just calmly point out, no, this just happened. It had nothing to do with me. I liked noticing that even though I was being confronted, and some might exaggerate to say attacked or accused, I could answer from a place of confidence and peace, not defense. The other benefit of noticing myself being cast as a villain came when I wondered, do I ever cast this person as a villain in my story? Do we do this to each other? Or do I ever cast anyone else as the villain in my story? And I realized, sometimes I do. My question to you is, who are you currently casting as the villain in your story? Who or what is ruining everything for you or standing in the way of what you want? Who is to blame for what has happened? Why is that person or thing a villain? Because you're casting them in that role in your narrative. Is it a political party or an elected official? Is it a family member? Is it a pandemic? Is it the creator of a social media site or an online retail platform? And as I mentioned those, you and I might feel justified as casting those characters as villains. It might feel necessary and moral and responsible to hate or dislike or fight or argue against. What do you get when you hate and dislike? What do you get when you fight and argue? Is that what you want for yourself? Is it beneficial for you to classify someone or something as a villain in your story? I really don't have a moral or a suggestion about the villain here for you, except just to point out to you, in case you find yourself casting anyone or anything in your life in the role of the villain, if it puts you on the defensive or in victim role, that casting thought might not be helpful to you. If it puts you in scarcity instead of abundance, if it puts you in fear instead of love, it might not be creating the result you want for your life. The last three characters that I described were what you can watch out for in your own real-life fairy tale. If you're looking for a knight in shining armor, a fairy godmother, or if you're noticing that you're dealing with a villain in your life, you might have some thoughts to reframe, some stories that you're telling yourself to check and edit and rewrite. The next character I'm going to describe is someone I do want you to get imaginative about and believe in all the time. Make this part of your self-created fairy tale real for you. Whenever we think about a fairy tale, there's always a central character, a hero. You are the hero of your own hero's journey. You're the star, and you get to decide how you travel on your path, how you react to the people and the situations that you encounter. You also get to decide what you make everything mean. Of course, you're going to go through trials and tribulations while you're on your journey. Of course, sometimes you win and sometimes you lose, or learn is maybe a better way to phrase that expression. Think about your own journey so far. What's happened? How do you tell the story of your past to yourself? Think about the path that you're currently on. Is it one that you have intentionally chosen for yourself? Think about the central figures in your favorite fairy tales. Did she have a hard time, or was everything handed to her from the start? Did she ever feel abandoned and alone? Did he ever feel like an imposter? Did he see something he wanted, but it seemed impossible for him to get at first until he figured it out? And how did those characters get through those challenging situations? How did they deal with their disappointment and find their way out of being lost and alone? Maybe they used their own cleverness and adventurous spirit. Maybe they got help from unexpected friends. Maybe they sang or whistled or made believe until they made it through to the other side. You decide what you think, how you feel, and what you do. You can find guides to offer you insight and advice, like maybe a coach or a mentor or a teacher, and you can remind yourself that you are on a journey, and this current moment is just one stop along the way, just one scene in the production, just one chapter of your whole story, your fairy tale. My hope for you is that you will consider if any of these characters show up in your fairy tale, and that you will live intentionally ever after. The end. Wait, yes, that is the end of my description of modern fairy tale characters, but I still want to give you a gift. If you are one of my favorites, meaning you're on my email list, I have already magically delivered to you through the magic of email a hero's journey worksheet. If you want to consider your own story, what you're creating for yourself, what's happening, and what has happened to you, and who you want to be, you may find the prompts and questions interesting. You'll have to let me know how it goes. If you're not on my email list yet, make sure to join at bexb.org/favorites so that you will always get notified whenever I put out new episodes. Plus, you'll always get the fun extras that I send out along with each week's new episode. And if you would like a guide along this part of your fairy tale, I would be honored to be your coach. I would love to help you recognize what you may be wishing for, who you may be casting in which roles, and how you can see yourself as the hero. For the remaining weeks of 2020, I am offering an end of 2020 coaching special. We will have a personal coaching call once a week for the rest of October, November, and December to help you make sense of what has happened in your life and what you want to create for yourself as you go along your journey. If you're curious if this might be helpful to you, just go to my website, bexb.org, and check out the link that says Work With Me. Let's set something up for you. Next week, I have something a little different planned. It is an episode based on a question exercise I discovered one morning while journaling, and I was so excited by it that I invited some listeners of this podcast, some friends, colleagues, and clients to share their insights too, so that next week can be a co-created episode. You don't want to miss it. Thank you for listening. Have a great week and talk to you next Friday. This has been Release Your Resistance. Thank you for listening. If you like this podcast, make sure you're subscribed and leave a review on Apple Podcasts. Also, think about someone who you know who would love this episode and share it with them. There should be a share button on your app if you're listening to this on your phone. If you'd like to continue this conversation one-on-one or in real time, come visit me on my site at beckspeed.org to see how we can work together.